All right. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited about our tonight's event. We have our wonderful Joan Sedita with us today. We're so excited to learn from her about the writing rope framework, and we're excited to get to know you all and hear about your experiences a little bit as well, if time permits. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'll give it to you, Kristen.
Good job. All right, go ahead and click to the next slide. We just wanted to let you all know this is the first event that we are hosting as the California Reading League chapter with our new vice president and director of events. If you know Zaroya, you love Leslie Zaroya, and her term with our chapter ended in December. And we are welcoming in tonight Tirith Graywall as our new Vice President and Director of Events. So I hope you'll give her a warm welcome. And we will miss Leslie for sure, but we're happy to have Tirith here in this role. So thanks, Tirith. Our mission is to promote an awareness, understanding, and use of evidence-aligned literacy instructional practices and curriculum in California based on reading science. That's the mission of our chapter.
And now we'll go ahead and welcome Joan. Before we begin, I would love to share just a little bit about her. So, she has been an educator, an administrator, teacher trainer, and literacy consultant. She's provided literacy professional development to thousands of teachers. She was also a national letters author and trainer. In 2007, she founded Keys to Literacy and is the lead author of Keys to Literacy, which is a professional development. It includes materials, online courses, books. She continues to develop literacy professional development programs and presents at literacy conferences. She has also created the Writing Rope. It's a framework for writing instruction. She has authored several books, and you can find more information about her work and about her current projects on the website Keys to Literacy. So please welcome Joan Sedita. We are so excited to hear from her. Thank you so much, Joan.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, California Reading League, for being giving me this opportunity. I am going to share my screen and oh, I think you guys have to close out. Hold on a sec. There we go. All right. All right. I think we're good there, right? Give me a thumbs up, Tirith. We're good? Yeah. All right. Excellent. So again, welcome. We're going to be talking about the writing rope framework, but I'm also going to, in addition to focusing on the strands and the different skills and strategies, my goal is to also try to convince you, many of you I'm sure are already there, how important it is, how essential it is that we integrate reading in writing instruction. You know, for too long, we talk about these things, they're like in silos. So I'm also going to, as we walk through the different strands, find opportunities to emphasize where the reading and writing connect. I am going to be drawing from three books. Of course, The Writing Rope, that's published by Brooks Publishing, but also two books that I wrote earlier for Keys to Literacy, Keys to Early Writing, which is for kindergarten to grade 2, and then Keys to Content Writing. But let's begin by just taking a look at the writing rope. What is it? Folks say, gee, what is this, a program? Is it a curriculum? And no, it's neither of those. It's a framework. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Hollis Scarborough's reading rope. We're going to actually hit that again in a couple of minutes. But what I've felt over many, many years is that we've really neglected the teaching of writing. I think when the National Reading Panel came out, that was terrific, and things like Reading First in the early 2000s. And it really it shined a light on what we need to be doing about reading, but somehow we neglected writing. And so over the years, I've felt that many folks in our field, whether they're elementary teachers or literacy folks in the upper grades, if you ask them, for example, what are the 5 components of reading, they can tell you right away. But when I would ask that of the same teachers, well, what are the components of writing? They aren't sure. If they're early elementary, they'll say it's spelling or handwriting. If they're maybe working in the high school, it's teaching skills to answer prompts on high stakes tests. So that's why I put this framework together. As you can see, I've taken up all the skills and strategies that we know from research need to be taught and organized them in this framework, 5 different strands. What I'm going to do tonight is go through each strand and we're going to talk about it. I'm going to share some information. I'm also going to try to give you some practical teaching suggestions that if you work directly with kids, you can start using tomorrow. So we will work our way through all the stages. Just very briefly, I'm going to hit the mountaintops. At the bottom, we have transcription, which is literally the skills needed to get the words on the page. So obviously spelling and handwriting / keyboarding. And next up, we have writing craft. This does tend to be the purview of the English teacher or the ELA teacher or writing teachers. It's about word choice. This is where vocabulary lives. It's also about something called TAP, or awareness of your task, your audience, and your purpose when you're writing. And that's very important. We'll revisit that. And this is also where a whole bunch of literary devices live that kids need to know: writing craft, writing moves. So one simple example is if you're writing a narrative, how do you use dialogue between the folks in the characters in your piece? Next up, we have text structure, and there's quite a bit tucked in under here. On the broadest levels, we have the larger genres, the structures, and I chose to use the 3 most common that you often will find in state writing standards. So narrative, informational, and opinion or argument if it's older grade. So that's the broader. What are those structures? Next, we have paragraph structure. I'm not sure what grades you all are working with, but I will tell you that many of our older students who struggle with writing, they still don't get what a paragraph is. Then we also have patterns of organization. There are 5 of them, major ones, but description versus sequence versus cause and effect. And then, of course, these linking or transition words and phrases they're just such important words. And many of our students, certainly many of our English learners, a lot of our students who have difficulty with literacy, they're not part of their repertoire. But these are words that we use in writing to connect one sentence to another, one paragraph to another, a section to a section. But we also use them to signal these various patterns of organization. So that's text structure. Next up is syntax, which is all about sentences and sentence writing. And it's the same thing. Many of our older students who struggle with writing still can't write a solid sentence. And we're going to talk, I'll share a few activities like sentence combining with you that are really helpful for building that syntactic awareness. And then last but not least, at the top is critical thinking. And there's only 2 bullets here, but there's an awful lot of skills and strategies that fall under this. The second one is about the stages of the writing process. And I'm going to share a model for you that I developed, just called Think, Plan, Write, Revise, and making sure we teach kids the strategies they need at each one of those stages. But the top bullet is about the skills and strategies needed for when we use writing to learn. Writing about what we're reading, writing about what we're learning. And that includes a whole host of skills, including note-taking, summarizing, paraphrasing. So that's the big picture of the writing rope. You have a URL down there that brings you to the Keys to Literacy free resources section. There's an article section where the original piece that I wrote about the writing rope in 2018, late 2018, you can download that if you want to learn a little bit more about the strands in the rope. If we're talking about writing instruction, in a moment, we're not gonna spend the whole time talking about research, all right? We're gonna get practical. But I really believe it's important for educators to know what the research says. It should inform our decisions. So there are 4 reports in particular, research meta-analysis reports, that if you want to learn more about what the research says, I highly suggest you access them. You can download them. Writing to Read is all about taking a look at Stephen Graham and Michael A. Bear did a meta-analysis on how writing supports reading. No surprise, it does, right? Writing Next was one of the first to come out that identified the most effective uh, strategies for teaching writing that are highly significant. And then two Institute of Education science guides, one for elementary and secondary. So I do hope you access these so you can learn more about the research. And all of these reports, especially the IES ones, do a great job of then translating that research into practice. There's one other framework that, in this beginning here where I'm sort of laying the foundation that I want you to be aware of. It was developed by Virginia Berninger and colleagues almost 20 years ago. They originally called it the simple view of writing and then changed it to the not so simple view. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's the takeaways. And what this does is really highlight another aspect of writing that in the writing rope, I focused on all the things that we can teach, like what instruction do kids need? And you'll notice that down on the bottom is transcription. That's that first strand in the writing rope. At the top, we've got all the skills needed to generate text. That's all the other strands. But what's left, that triangle and the box on the right, has to do more, not so much with skills that we can teach, but these are cognitive processes, right? And many of our students struggle with writing and other literacy aspects because they have weaknesses in executive functions. And executive functions include working memory, and that's absolutely essential. It's why I believe Berninger put it at the center of this, right? But it also includes the ability to focus attention and set goals and plan, revision, self-regulate. So many of you cannot teach working memory. Kids have what they have, but here's where you can help our students who have difficulty. All of the scaffolds that go with an explicit, structured approach to teaching writing are what's going to give these kids the tools they need to handle what those deficits are. So things like graphic organizers, word lists, writing templates, that's what helps these kids. So this is another seminal framework as it relates to writing. This little slide, this little puzzle piece I put together here, you're going to keep seeing it. I'm going to bring it up in many slides every time there's an opportunity to reinforce that something I'm sharing with you. Yes, we're here to talk about how you improve writing, but it also will support reading. So this is going to keep coming up. And I already mentioned a little bit about this report, and their findings were, no surprise, when kids write, it supports reading. It actually supports lots of elements of reading, including fluency and even decoding. But the one that I always focus on is their first recommendation, that when students write about what they're reading, it improves their comprehension of that text, but it also improves their ability to learn the content related to that. And that is across all subjects, science, history, etc. What they found from the research was in specifically four things: that when we have students write any kind of response to the text, right? It might be a personal reaction, maybe analyzing and interpreting the text. If we have them write summaries and teach them how to take notes, and for those of you who are familiar with the research about effective comprehension strategies, you'll notice that summarizing is right up at the top of the list as well. And then finally, teaching students how to use writing to not only answer questions, but generate their own questions in writing. So let's keep all this in mind as we go through. And at the very end, when I get to that critical thinking strand, a lot of this is going to come together. So let's begin, though, a little bit of talk about language and oral language in particular. And I'm sure many of you have seen this quote before: reading and writing float on a sea of talk. What does that mean to you, right? And let's explore this a little bit further. So look, reading, speaking and listening come naturally. We learn this probably before we're even born, but certainly our first few years. Reading and writing do not come naturally. They're rather new in terms of all the millennia that humans have been around. It's rather new. And the thing about reading and writing is they share the same cognitive processes, which is why we want to be teaching them together, but they're also drawing on the same oral language base. Shanahan Fitzgerald once coined this drawing from the same well, and that well is the language. So the more our students have language from spoken, from listening and speaking, the easier it's going to be for them to learn reading and writing. Okay, I mentioned a little bit earlier that we were going to talk for a minute about Scarborough's rope, and I want to do it within the context of showing you how reading and writing are so connected, all the ways that there's overlap. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but those of you who are familiar with this model know that Hollis identified a whole bunch of linguistic processes and skills that can be organized into two sections. You can see them here. Those on the bottom associated with word recognition, decoding, and then a whole bunch of others that are on the top associated with language comprehension. I want you to see background knowledge, right? Let's look at vocabulary. Under language structures, we have syntax, right? Under verbal reasoning, inferencing, critical thinking. And under literacy knowledge, we have knowledge of genres. So let's keep this in mind because you already saw the writing rope, right? So now let's put the two of them next to each other and you can see the puzzle pieces, right? So on the top, in the reading rope, we've got the background knowledge, verbal reasoning that's highly connected to the strategies students need to be taught in the critical thinking strand of the writing rope. We have syntax in both ropes. We have in reading the literate knowledge of genres and the structures for genres that matches up with part of the text structure rope, strand of the rope. Vocabulary. Vocabulary, yes, we know students need to be familiar with an awfully high percentage, 90 to 95% of the words in text that they're reading in order to comprehend. But we also know that vocabulary is absolutely essential to be able to write. And then finally, on the bottom, we have a word recognition alphabetic principle, right? In terms of learning phonics for decoding, but at the same time, we should be teaching that phonics and advanced word study to develop the transcription skill of spelling. So hopefully, just in this simple little slide, I've been able to start to convince you that there is so much overlap between these two areas. All right, what we're going to do now is make our way up the rope, beginning with transcription. And as I said before, transcription is about spelling or handwriting / keyboarding. One of the things that we know from research is that when students leave third grade, around fourth grade, if they're not pretty fluent with handwriting and spelling, this is going to take a toll on their ability to focus on the higher level composing skills. For those of you that are familiar with it, it's a lot like the way fluency works with reading. We know that when students leave third grade, going into fourth, if they don't have automatic, they're not fluent with that ability to read words, word reading, decoding, what happens? They have to put so much working energy into that aspect of reading that it really takes away from their ability to focus on making meaning. And it works in the same way with writing. So what I've got for you, I broke things apart here. The transcription, you see it on the left, and I'm going to emphasize again, this is why during any phonics lesson, we want to be incorporating spelling. And over on the right are all the other areas of the writing rope. So let's talk a bit more about phonics, but also morphology. Morphology is the study of meaningful word units like prefixes, suffixes, and roots. So teaching letter sound correspondences, beginning alphabetic principle, syllable types and division, And then these morphemes, these meaningful parts, as well as structural analysis. So when you have to spell or when you come across a multisyllabic word, you've got a routine to kind of break it apart. It helps both reading and writing. It's going to help the reading in order to decode the words, right? And it's going to help the spelling in order to spell. And this is where the morphemes become especially important because in English, we don't spell just by sounds. We spell by retaining the meaning that comes with a root word or a meaningful unit. And so sometimes the spelling doesn't necessarily match the sound, but it remains the same to keep that morphological meaning. Next, we have writing craft. And as I said, this is where vocabulary lives, right? We know how important vocabulary is for comprehension, but it also supports word choice for writing. And, I want you to think about how frustrating it can be for students who have got something they really want to say. They've got ideas that are important, they want to share them, but they can't find the words to express it, right? So, any instruction that we can do around vocabulary is going to be critical for supporting reading comprehension that most teachers are aware of, but they don't really think about how vocabulary instruction also supports writing. The other thing that I have tucked in under writing craft is, I mentioned before, task, audience, and purpose. And all proficient writers, without even thinking about it, are aware of what is my task, what do I have to do with this piece of writing, highly aware of who their audience is and their purpose. And by being aware of that, it ends up affecting decisions that they have to make about their writing. What tone am I going to use? What structure? What language should I use? Many of our kids who struggle with writing across all the grades, they don't automatically think about this. So one of the things from an instruction point of view is we want to make sure we get kids to understand this important role. And one way to do that is anytime we assign a writing task to them, include as part of the instructions what the task is, who the audience, and what the purpose is, and call their attention to that. Let's explore more about writing craft. This is sometimes called writer's moves, right? And all good writing requires the knowledge of some of these moves. It's sometimes also called the art of writing. It's basically anything that one does on purpose to make your writing look or sound a certain way, right? So it's decisions that get made about the tone you're going to use, the voice, your word choice, even how you organize and structure your pieces. So this is, it's absolutely essential, but very, very often teachers aren't thinking about teaching writing craft. What else do we know about it? I mentioned writer's voice. So what is this? This is kind of the unique style that comes across. It's sometimes called writing from the heart because it can cause emotions on the part of the readers, and it's choices that are made. So I want you to think about if you have a favorite author, and maybe you've read many of this author's books and you're kind of familiar with their voice and their style. You might read another book, not knowing that it's by the author, and you will say, I recognize that. And that's what we're talking about here. It also involves very purposeful use of language, very precise, being descriptive. And that's again why it's so important for vocabulary. And then, of course, a whole host of literary devices, some that we can introduce in the earliest grades, like dialogue and how to start using figurative language, and others that are more advanced, like using allegory or hyperbole that come into the upper middle and into high school. Okay. So this is where I can begin to bring in some instructional suggestions. Uh, there are a number of what I call teaching principles that we want to remember when we're teaching writing. They're also very helpful for teaching other things and reading as well. Things like explicit instruction, systematic instruction. But one that's fairly unique to writing is the use of what's called mentor models or model text. And part of the reason this is important is because we all learn to write and improve our writing by emulating others, right? So, for example, a couple of years ago, I was in a car accident and I had to write an accident report, and I had never written one. So I'm at the police station, and what do you think I asked for? I said, can I see a couple of examples? Because you emulate that, right? You all do it. We all do it. And that's the idea of mentor models. Now, the problem with this for approaches to teaching writing that are a little bit, more not as explicit, is that teachers will just show students books, or they'll show them a poem and they'll say, isn't this wonderful? Now you can do it. We have to be much more explicit. And so to use mentor models, you want to first figure out what is the skill or the strategy that I'm honing in on. Maybe I'm showing them something about structure, like how to write an introduction. Maybe it's around style or language. I want to show them how to use very precise language, or maybe how to state a claim in an argument, or how to use transition words, right? So you identify what the skill or strategy is. Then you find a couple of really good examples of that have been published, either by formally publishing or by other students, right? And you analyze the example and you have students practice it with support, guided practice. And these models can also be shown about every stage of the writing process. You might even show students models of what good note taking looks like. Okay. So keep this in mind about mentor models. And what I'm going to do with you here is combine a few things that have to do with writer's craft and the use of mentor models. And I'm going to show you two examples, one at a young level and one at an upper level. So let's start with this first example. This actually is from my Keys to Early Writing book and course. So let's say we have our young ones. And by the way, gosh, I could spend an hour talking about this. When our children are young in kindergarten, beginning first, and they still can't write very many words and barely a sentence, that doesn't mean they can't compose, right? We don't have to wait for them to be able to write sentences. They can do their composing through their oral language and through their drawings. So we've got really young ones. And what do you see? I've got three model texts. What is the technique do you think I'm trying to show my students? What do you see in all three of these? And the answer is speech bubbles. So I might share three examples like this with my students. I'd read it aloud. We'd talk about what are they doing. Oh, well, they're talking to each other. And the way you show that when you write is you use speech bubbles and dialogue. So then we might say to our students, all right, now I want you to get together with some partners, because collaboration is another one of those teaching principles that really supports writing, giving kids opportunities to work collaboratively at every stage of the writing process. So now you might say, all right, I want you to take out the drawings that you did the other day. We read this read aloud about Meg and Tilly, and you did a drawing to express whether you think they're still friends or not. Why don't we try what we just learned in our mentor models with our characters on your drawings? So that's a very simple example. Now let's talk about one that you could use in an upper grade. So for this, I'm going to focus on a writer's craft that's called writing a lead, a nonfiction lead. Some of you might know this as the word of like a hook, right? And there's lots of leads. We have to teach kids the different kinds of leads they can use. But I've got three very common ones. Using a quote. This often happens in your introduction. Using a quote, posing a question to the reader, maybe presenting some fascinating facts. So on the next slide, I've got two samples of introductions. They're both about high school dropout rates. And I want you to determine which of these leads, which two out of the three leads were used. So let's read the first one together. Sarah White is an all too typical student in Philadelphia. She stopped going to school last year and was on her way to becoming one more dropout. The teachers didn't care. The students didn't care. White said, nobody cared, so why should I? So let's go back. Which of the three were used? And hopefully you said using a quote. Let's look at the next example. And I'm not even going to take the time to actually read it out loud. I want you to skim it over. And what do you notice? Look at all those numbers. Look at all the percentages. Look at the dates, right? And so this is an example, right, of presenting fascinating facts and details. So once again, we would analyze these examples. We'd say, what did this author do? How did they use these leads? Then you would go back to your students and say, all right, now I want you to practice using a lead. Let's pull out the introductions you've been writing to your compositions and go back in, and maybe you even do it with a partner. Pick one of these three types of leads and add it to your introduction. So that's a little bit about what happens at the writing craft phase strand. Now let's talk about text structure. And as I said earlier, we're going to hit quite a few things under here. But let's just talk about how text structure not only supports kids' writing, but it supports their reading comprehension. One of the things we've learned from research is that when we teach text structures to students, it gives them a scaffold. It's almost like clues that they get to making meaning as they're reading. And in fact, the more structured a piece of text is, the easier it is to comprehend it. So what is it? Text structure refers to building, literally building a piece of text. And so it's going to help both reading and writing. What do we want to teach for text structure? And we want the instruction to be explicit. We want to teach the differences among a narrative, informational, and opinion argument. How are they structured the same? How are they structured differently? We want to teach paragraph structure, which is all about teaching main ideas. We can teach our students about text features, right? Like using headings and subheadings and using graphics and using bolded text, right? Patterns of organization and transitions, which I described before. So we're going to revisit each of these. And let's begin with the three major types. Many times our students don't know the difference between these. How are they the same? How are they different? And so a very simple anchor chart like this can be very helpful, right? We can look down the purpose, down the middle. A narrative, it's a story, real or imagined. So it could also be a biography, right? How is it organized? Well, it actually can be organized two ways. When you plan a narrative, or when you're reading a narrative and trying to comprehend it, you can focus on the structure that has to do with the sequence of events, things that happen beginning, middle, end, but also focus on the literary elements. So setting, character, problem and solution. Now, information, its purpose is to learn or present information. And how is it organized? It's usually organized by larger topics, subtopics under each larger topic, and then subtopics. So it's kind of organizational, right? It's why I can do this, a big topic, next level, next level. And that it therefore is broken up into sections and then paragraph main ideas that are grouped together in a section because they have different main ideas about the same topic. So it's very hierarchically structured. Argument, completely different purpose, right? Now you might have information in your argument, but overall its purpose is to give an opinion or try to convince. And what are its elements? There are 5. In the earliest grades, only the first 3. And that is your claim. That's your position. What are you trying to convince? Reasons. What's your reasons that back up that claim? Evidence, facts, figures, logical conclusions, right? That support each reason. Once our students hit beyond 5th grade, they have to add 2 more, and that is the counterclaim. What might the other side say? What might they question us? And then a rebuttal to that counterclaim. So it's organized along those 5 categories. So what I want to share with you now, and here we get into a little bit more of the practical, right, is a graphic organizer that I developed years ago using it for comprehension, but we modified it for preparing and as a pre-writing graphic organizer. So introduction, body development, conclusion. Those 3 components are very often many state writing standards, and many of them start with the three types of writing, right? Narrative, informational, opinion, argument. And then if you go in and you look at the sub standards for those, students beginning in the earliest grades are expected to learn how to write introductions for all three of those types and conclusions, and then learn the different ways that you develop the body. And this is where this graphic organizer comes into play. Because if we think back to this slide, and that the way these three are structured is different, especially in the body, this is where this becomes helpful. So if we have, if it's an informational or an argument opinion piece, you're going to use the one you see there. It's a default. What's your topic? A reminder that you have to have an introduction, you have to have a conclusion, but then how are you going to structure your body? If it's a narrative piece, that you move to the one on the bottom. So it's what's your title, and then what happens in the beginning, what happens in the middle, what happens in the end. Now, I don't have a lot of time to, I could spend a couple hours on this. So what I find is it's easier for me to just show you some classroom examples of each. Let's take a look at the one at the top, on the top left. This is from a class where the student was writing an argument piece. What was their claim? You notice that's under the introduction, right? And their claim is that legislation should be passed about social media in schools. Go to the conclusion. What are they saying? They're going to come back and provide some closure about the benefits of passing this legislation. But I want you to look at the body. So remember those elements. So one section, how many reasons is the student giving? You can see that there. What's the main point in the counterclaim? And what's the main point in the rebuttal? Now, the thing about these top-down webs is they're meant to give the big picture. You don't add a lot of details here at all. But when the student begins to write their piece, you can see how it helps keep them structured. They're going to first write about the first reason and add evidence, then the next, and so on and so forth. Now, let's look at an informational example on the right. This was a student's web completed. They were doing a little mini report about rocks. And you can see in the introduction, how are rocks formed? Conclusion wraps it up, formed in many ways. And I want you to look at the body. So 3 major topics. Under each subtopic is each of those is a subtopic. So this is going to play out in more of a hierarchical way. And then the last example, this was a student who was using this to develop a narrative of, it was in a history class actually, about the gold rush, of one man's journey. And you can see in the beginning, they're introducing the character and the setting, right? And the very first event that happens, it wraps up. And then the whole rest of this narrative is built out in sections under the middle. So I hope you're able to take this. I find that a lot of teachers come back and they tell me, even with these simple examples, they're able to use this. So now let's drill down a little bit and get down from bigger to a little bit smaller, and we'll talk about paragraph structure. And what is a paragraph? And I already mentioned to you that lots of our older kids still don't get it. Paragraph is really about main ideas. And it's unique to written text, to written language. When we read, the text is often chunked into paragraphs, with each paragraph being about a different main idea. They might be about the same general topic, but each paragraph, there's a shift in the main idea. And that's very important to support reading comprehension. But for writing, our students need to know how to construct a good, solid paragraph so that when they write, they can organize what they have to say in these meaningful units to make it easier for the reader. Now, one of the things we teach kids in the earliest grades is, you know this, the 3 parts of a paragraph. Topic sentence that states your main idea, supporting middle sentences, and a concluding that restates it. The reason I've got brackets around the concluding is that while this works with very young children, the fact of the matter is beyond grade 3, much of what our students are reading and writing is going to be multi-paragraphs. And look at just about any text that our kids are reading. There is not going to be a concluding sentence at the end of every single paragraph. We should have topic sentences because it makes the main idea obvious, but it's not necessarily always have a concluding. So, what are some practical things that we can do to develop paragraph reading and writing? All of these things can be used with our younger students as they're learning about paragraphs, but they can also be used as support and intervention for our older kids. There are several. I don't have time to go through all of them. I'm only going to go through the first one, color coding. Um, but we can also do activities like give students a group of sentences that are mixed up. They have to figure out which one is the topic sentence. We can give them a bunch of sentences, slide in a sentence that isn't associated with the main idea. They have to figure out which one that is. And then the hardest of them all is giving them a bunch of smaller, shorter sentences, details, and they have to generate the topic sentence themselves. But let's show and model. This is an example to give model text as well. So color coding with this, we teach students that if there is a topic sentence, we'll make it green. If there are all the supporting sentences, we'll make them yellow. And if there is a concluding sentence, we'll make it red. We'll highlight, could use markers or underline things. Now, in this case, I found this example years ago in a middle school science text, and it just stood out to me because it is so perfectly structured. So I knew it was going to be a great mentor model. And so we analyze this paragraph. We say, what did the author do? Do you see how easy it is to know what they're talking about because they give you the main idea in the beginning sentence? And we color code it. Eventually, we want, and this is a student writing sample, we want our students to be doing the color coding to their own paragraphs to ensure that they've got something green for every paragraph. Eventually, the color goes away. It just becomes part of the student's approach to writing, but it's a very structured approach to paragraph structure. I mentioned before about patterns of organization. You can see the 5 major patterns. And once again, I am showing you that little puzzle pieces, right? Because when we teach students about these patterns and what the language looks like for each of them, including the transitions, it's going to support their reading because when they are aware of the pattern and the structure, it can help them unpack the meaning, but it also helps their writing as they choose which patterns best reflect what they have to say. So these are the 5 major ones. And then with them, as I mentioned before, are the transitions. And you can see some of the most common ones, right? And as I said before, they link different parts of our writing, but they signal the patterns. And we want to be teaching transitions to both support reading comprehension as well as their writing. Okay. Now, on this slide, I'm going to share with you something. This is a list of transitions that's organized. It's not just alphabetical, but it's organized down the left side. You'll see it by purpose for the transition. So are you indicating a time relationship or spatial? Are you listing a series of events? Are you summarizing? Are you comparing? And over on the right are transition words and phrases that can be used. Now, I've given you the link again to the Keys to Literacy free resources because this is available in the downloads. I will admit to you, I'm going on 50 years of teaching literacy this summer, and I developed this in 1978, and I have been giving it out ever since. Before, I used to have to, my students would write me and they said, Miss Sedita, I'm in college. I lost my transition list. Can you mail me one? But now with the internet, I can just make it available. You don't have to use this one. The point is, especially for our kids that have language issues, if they can have a set of transitions within easy reach, they're going to be more likely to include them in their writing. Syntax strand, all about the sentences, right? And what is syntax actually? It is the system and arrangement of words, phrases, and clauses that make up a sentence. It's about the grammar of a particular language, the rules that govern the order for our words. So, for example, in English, we put our adjectives before our nouns. So I might say the flat gray table. In a Romance language, we might put them after. So we would say the table flat gray. But that doesn't sound right, right? And what we're trying to do is develop that sentence sense. And many of the activities that you can use, including sentence combining, have been found to be more effective at developing that and enabling students to write better sentences than formal grammar. And by that, I mean things like labeling parts of speech. So if we teach students about sentence structure and we do a lot of the activities that develop that, once again, yes, it's going to support their writing. They're going to write better sentences, but it will also support reading comprehension, especially of long, complex sentences that oftentimes trip our kids up their comprehension when they're reading. So what are some things that we can do? I've got 4 of them listed here. I only have time to show you 2, but there is, I should have mentioned this before. So since 2015, every month, religiously, I write a blog post. I pick a topic and I explore it. I give suggestions. I give research related and resources. A couple of years ago, I did a 2-part, so 2 months, sentence structure and then part 2. And I take each of these and offer significant detail about how to use them and lots of examples. So if you want to learn a little bit more about all of these, just go into the Literacy Lines blog and look for the topic sentence structure. So we're going to focus now on sentence combining and sentence elaboration. This has been around and studied for ages. In that Writing Next report that I mentioned to you, it turns out it's one of the 11 recommendations of a highly effective strategy, having students combine sentences. It's been studied forever. I can remember in the late 70s using sentence combining with my students with dyslexia that I worked with. And I saw major improvements in both their writing and in their reading comprehension. It's been found to be helpful across kindergarten all the way up through college. So what is it? Well, you literally have students combine sentences. I'm going to start with some very simple examples. Can you put these together in a sentence? Pretty easy, right? How about these two? Right? So it's very simple. And you begin with sentences that these are everyday sentences, but you want to use sentences the students are that's related to what they're learning, maybe in math or in science or from something that they're reading in English language arts. Now I'm going to show you the opposite end, just how challenging sentence combining can be. We don't have the time in this webinar, but if we did, I would say, can you take all 7 of these sentences and combine them into one sentence that doesn't leave out any key ideas? And I know that you could do it. And if you did it with a partner and you talked about how you're combining the words, what you'll see how this works. You begin manipulating words and trying different combinations until it sounds right. Okay. And the other reason that I show you this example is to once again say that don't just do it about anything. Have the sentences that the kids are combining be about whatever they're studying, which happened in this example. So when you do sentence combining, remember, begin with very short, 2 simple sentences, add a 3rd sentence or make your 2 original sentences longer. And then as the students get more adept at this, and of course, as they get older, you can eventually move up to tasks like this. The next thing I want to share with you is about sentence elaboration practice. And there's lots of ways that we can do this with our students. One is to use what we call the W questions. I'll show you that in a minute. And then the other is to do something called an expanded kernel sentence, which is something that my dear colleagues from Landmark School, Charlie Haynes and Terry Jennings developed, oh gosh, over 20 years ago. So, but what does sentence elaboration, what does that have to do with? Well, very often as our students get older, we want them to make their sentences longer, right? And more unique and more unusual, right? You don't want the same five sentences, 5 words per sentence. So these activities will help our kids write stronger and longer and more sophisticated sentences, right? That use more sophisticated punctuation. It's also going to help our students learn to incorporate more academic vocabulary. It gives them an opportunity to integrate more than one idea within the same subject, right? And all of this work will also help their reading comprehension. And this work is especially helpful for our English learners. So, simplest is you use a series of questions. This happens to be some questions that are on cards that have an added scaffold. They have a word that could be used, selected to actually start a sentence frame. So who is or who did or who can, right? When would, when will, and so on and so forth. So you make these question words available. I'm just going to show you how it ends up building out a sentence. Now, you don't just say, use these words. You've got to model it. You've got to be explicit. You got to give God practice. So let's say we're in social studies and we're learning about the pilgrims. So we give them this very basic, in this case, it's a subject, the pilgrims. And through a series of questions, we gradually have the students add more and more to the sentence until they end up with the one you see here, which was generated through who, what, where, when, and why. Let's look at the next one, which is much higher example in the upper grades. U.S. Constitution. Well, what is it? The when questions answers when it was ratified, how, who. So these can be very, very helpful. The other one that I mentioned was expanded kernel sentences. And again, this is from Jennings and Charlie Haynes. So you start with a kernel sentence, and then you use some or all of the following steps. You take the subject of that simple kernel sentence and you elaborate by adding articles and adjectives. Next, you elaborate the predicate, right? By adding verbs and adding adverbs. Then you add a phrase. Then you compound the subject. Then you compound the predicate, and so on and so forth. The easiest way is for me to just model it for you. Now, you would not hit the students with all of this at once. You gradually teach them how to expand their sentences. So let's use this very simple kernel, the turtle swims. And if we elaborate it, we'll add adjectives. The small green turtle swims. The predicate. The small green turtle swims how? Quickly. Add a phrase. Into the seaweed. Compound the subject. The small green turtle and his friend dive quickly into the seaweed. Let's compound the predicate. They're not only diving, they are swimming, right? Add a dependent clause. Because he is frightened, and you've got the rest of the sentence. And you can get as far as, now let's combine two into a compound sentence. So we had the one we've been building, and we add another sentence, and they hide from predators. So you can see how this builds up. It's an amazing, sequential, very systematic approach. All right, so that leaves us towards the end here of the writing rope. We've walked through each one of the strands, and hopefully I've given you some practical strategies, right, for teaching. But let's delve a little bit more deeply into this. And where I want to start is with the stages of the writing process. And these have been studied for a long time. And some researchers, God, back to the 1960s, Hayes and Flowers, started trying to identify the stages that proficient writers follow. And the thinking was, if we can figure that out, then we can teach these to kids. So this has been around for a long time. And there's different ways of organizing them. We generated, my colleagues and I at Keys to Literacy, a simple acronym to help students called the Process Writing Routine. And the first letter of each of those words stands for think, plan, write, and revise. If you want to download this, this is also accessible at the free resource list. Now, what you'll see under this is several sub-steps. So at the thinking stage, this is where our students have to pay careful attention from the beginning to the audience and the purpose. This is where they're brainstorming or narrowing down their topic. They're gathering information, especially if they're writing from sources or they're writing about text. And what do they need to do that? They need a note-taking system. They need to know how to take notes. We have to explicitly teach that. I wish I had another hour with you. Those of you who know my work, I'm a big fan of 2-column notes. Next stage is the planning. So great, you've got all these ideas, maybe you've saved them in notes, but how are you going to structure your writing piece? And this is where you go back to what I was sharing before, right, about the different structures. If it's a narrative piece, you've got to plan what your beginning, middle, and end is going to be. If it's informational, you've got to, besides your intro and conclusion, you've got to plan how you're going to share the topics and the subtopics. And if it's an argument or opinion piece, you've got to plan out where you're going to put your reasons, where the evidence for each reason is going to go, where your counterclaim is going to go. So the planning is absolutely essential. And this is where making sure our students have a planning guide is helpful. It could be the top-down web that I shared with you. There are other things. You could use an outline. There are other graphic organizers, but we need to teach kids how to do this. Now, one of the things you'll notice at the right stage is that the first bullet I've put under here is follow the guide. How many of your students, you give them a graphic organizer to plan ahead of time, and then they start writing and they don't even look at the guide? So part of this explicit instruction is sharing and modeling. All right, how do you take each part of your notes and turn it into a paragraph and good sentences? The right stage is where all the items, so many of the items in the writing rope, all come into play. How do you write good sentences? How do you add transitions? How do you write introductions that have good leads? How do you put closure at the end of your pieces? How do you incorporate academic vocabulary, paragraph structure? So this is where all those skills come together. And then let's not forget revision, where a lot of kids, they are so done by the time they're finished with their draft, they don't want to look at it again, but we have to teach them that revision is where the final touches go. And we recommend 2 rounds of revision. The first is to read what you've written and review the content. Is it what you wanted to say? Does it make sense? Is it well structured? And then do your second revision to look for proofreading, convention, spelling, punctuation. Now, one last word I want to say about this is, why do we have the arrow here? It's to remind our students that while this is a progression, don't skip any stages. You think, you plan, you write, you revise. That all good writers constantly recycle. It's a circular process. So you might be at the right stage and realize, uh-oh, I don't have enough information. I've got to go back to the think stage and gather some more information, okay? Or I'm at the revision stage, and what I realize is I got to go back to the right stage and restructure my piece. The last thing I'm going to leave you with, and this is one of those places I'm going to come back to, let's come back to this, right? We started early on about what the research says about how writing supports reading comprehension. And that's what this is all about, using writing to support learning. And this is a phrase I often use: writing is thinking. Even little quick writes. When you write a grocery list before you go shopping, and then you forget the list at home, the fact that you wrote the list will help you remember what you need to give. And it's a very simple example, but it's what we mean about how writing makes us think. And what are some of the skills we've got to teach? There's an awful lot. If you're writing from text sources, how do you annotate them? How do you take notes? How do you plan and organize before you write, right? How do you turn the notes into sentences? What about editing skills? There's an awful lot we have to teach. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. I think, gosh, I actually am almost right on time here. Amazing. So a couple of big takeaways. Number one, writing instruction must address multiple components, and that's the purpose of the writing rope. Don't forget any of the strands. Number two, all teachers can play a role. The problem with writing is too great for just English teachers and ELA teachers to handle. We need all hands on deck, especially teaching the skills about writing to learn. Use an explicit approach that includes a gradual release, I, we, you. And don't forget those mentor models and don't make any assumptions. The older our kids get, the more we assume they have basic skills like sentences and paragraphs, and many of them do not. So with that, I'm going to leave you with this slide. It's got the link to my blog. It's got the link to the instructional resources. And those are just some of the courses and books that I've written. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Tirith. I'm going to stop sharing because I know you have some slides you want to share to wrap this up.
Thank you so much, Joan. That was so much incredible information. You really made me think about when I taught sixth grade and how critical all of these components were. I think the biggest takeaway for me was that writing instruction needs to be just as explicit and structured as we emphasize it for reading. So thank you so much, and thank you for explaining the overlap and the alignment between reading and writing instruction. It was just invaluable information. We appreciate you so much. As we wrap it up, I'm going to let Kristen share our next upcoming event so you're able to register. I'll share my screen so you know exactly how to access those. Kristen?
Thanks, everyone. We will send follow-up resources to all the registrants, and that'll include all of the links that Joan mentioned. Join the Reading League to get information on our upcoming events. In February, we have a chapter meeting. We have some information about Reading Universe, what it is and how you can use it, and we'll have regional breakout rooms so you can talk to people and share ideas and do all the things that you do when you see friends who are also in the classroom like you. And then in March, we have Altheria Caldera from the Reading League National Office. She's going to talk about literacy and equity. She is a wonderful speaker. If you have never heard her speak, please join us and talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, her project at the Reading League National. All right. Anything else, Tira?
Yeah. Can I just, because I just saw on your last slide about Reading Universe, I want to put a plug in for them and to also say that Reading Universe is building out a writing section about writing instruction, and they have asked us, we've been working with them for the last year now to build out that section. And we've already taken all those things about sentence writing that I was sharing. We've built all those sections out with them. So go to the Reading Universe website, click on writing, and a lot of things that I talked about tonight are there. They also have information about the writing rope. It's a great resource. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's a
No,
great
all
plug.
good. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the endorsement. All right, everyone. Happy Thursday. Have a great night.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.